listening to the Labor Notes podcast, our weekly show on rank and file news and organizing tactics. I'm Danielle Smith, an organizer at Labor Notes.
And I'm Natasha Elena Ullman, a staff writer at Labor Notes. If you've been here before, welcome back. And if you're new to the pod, we're so glad to have you. Our podcast is possible because of listeners like you who tune in every week and support our show and our organization with small dollar donations. And if you're new, like you haven't been on labornotes.org to read our reporting on shop floor actions, strikes, and union politics, or you haven't been to our conference, which is the gathering we're probably best known for, that we put together every 2 years for rank-and-file union members, welcome.
You've come at a good time, too. Labor Notes is in the middle of our year-end fundraising drive, where we tell you or remind you who we are, what we do, and why we think it matters. Labor Notes is a nonprofit, independent media and organizing project funded by union members, organizers, and supporters in our network. All year round, we report labor news from the perspective of rank-and-file union members, highlighting powerful shop floor actions, effective stewarding tactics, contract campaigns, strikes, and organizing strategies to build our power as workers.
This year, we've covered the most consequential labor conflicts of the Trump 2.0 era. Our staff has reported on how federal workers are bringing in new union members and organizing against this administration's poorly conceived mass layoffs, attempts to subvert the mission of their agencies, and its efforts to eliminate collective bargaining agreements covering about 1 million federal workers. We've also reported on the building trades workers and others organizing immigrant defense and showing up outside detention centers to demand the release of coworkers detained in violent and wanton immigration raids, which are about fulfilling quotas and repressing political dissent and labor organizing. We've also put out a number of new resources for this moment, including a guide on building momentum in your union locals for May 2028 and disruptive actions even before then that go beyond public demonstrations. We've also put out a toolkit for workers who want to strategize with other union members in their communities about how to fight attacks at the state and local level.
All our work and coverage is at its heart about restoring the thing we need most right now. That is, working people acting with agency in the workplace, in their unions, and in society at large to protect our basic needs from the billionaires' power grab, to win our demands for a dignified life, and to claim our place in an actual democracy. If that resonates with you and you ever found our podcast, our events, or reporting, or workshops helpful to you, we ask that you support our work at labornotes.org/donate. You can make a one-time contribution, or better yet, keep our work going by becoming a monthly donor. New monthly donors giving us $10 a month or more will get a limited edition Fight the Boss, Build the Union t-shirt. And the podcast is in audio medium, so just imagine the sickest t-shirt you've ever seen in your life, and that's what it looks like. You also get You also get a free 1-year subscription to Labor Notes magazine, which is typically worth $30 a year for 11 issues. If you get in on this soon, before December 9th, you can start 2026 off right with the January issue of our magazine.
And if you contribute now, your donations can go twice as far thanks to a group of Labor Notes supporters who are ready to match your support up to $11,450. Again, that's labornotes.org/donate. Thank you so much for supporting us. With that, we're on to our episode about Canadian postal workers' showdown over the future of what public mail delivery will look like in Canada. Buckle up, because this story is so much more than about mail and honestly explains a lot about the way we live now. For starters, if you've ever thought about your government's obligation to provide reliable, affordable, or even free public services, and how lately that is being steadily undermined by pressure to shut down and or privatize those services, keep listening.
That's a good way to put it. And there's another layer to this story which working people everywhere will find familiar. And it goes hand in hand with what you're talking about, Natasha, about this erosion of government services and of even our expectations of what a functional government is supposed to do for us. And that's the degradation of stable, middle-class jobs with benefits. It's kind of a double whammy that we're experiencing both as members of society who deserve to expect certain basic services and infrastructure, and as workers asserting our right to live and retire with dignity.
That's just it, and it's happening everywhere. But let's zoom in for a moment. Danielle, could you fill us in on what bargaining has been like for Canadian postal workers so far and what they're fighting for?
Sure. So tens of thousands of workers at Canada Post, Canada's national postal service, have been bargaining for a new contract for about 2 years now. They're members of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, or CUPW. And like many workers, these posties, as they call them in Canada, are fighting for fair raises to protect their health care and retirement benefits and to stop the gigification of their work. But it's also not an exaggeration to say they're fighting to preserve a recognizable postal service at all. Because while the members have been organizing around their demands and proposing ideas to generate revenue and help the corporation's finances, Canada Post management has been busy ignoring them at the table and advocating for changes that would bulldoze through the service. And just in September this year, the cabinet minister in charge of Canada Post announced major changes that practically changed the definition of a postal service. He announced that Canada Post would slowly end delivering to home addresses and instead deliver only to community mailboxes. So imagine, a metal box for many addresses, but it's like a mile down the road from your house. And they're also planning to close down rural post offices as they see fit and to stop delivering mail 5 days a week. Not only does all of this raise the question of what a postal service is even for, but it could also mean job losses for more than 10,000 Canada Post workers, according to the union. Oh, and Canada Post has also been trying to have more part-time workers in the union, especially for weekend work, as Adam D.K. King, an assistant professor of labor studies at the University of Manitoba, reported in Jacobin last month. And that article also appeared in the print November issue of our Labor Notes magazine.
It makes sense then that Canadian postal workers have been on strike on and off over the past year. How has that been going, and how has the government stepped in to help management so far?
Yeah, so during this campaign, CUPW members first went on strike in November last year. But just 5 weeks into the strike, and right before the December holidays, arguably the posties' peak of strength, the Canadian government ordered them back to work without a new contract.
I remember us talking in an earlier episode about how the Canadian government's been making a habit of this lately.
Yeah, and you're probably thinking about how they tried to do the same thing to Air Canada flight attendants this summer. And those workers were like, no thanks. The flight attendants actually defied the same type of order that the Canadian government had imposed on postal workers last year, which was under Section 107 of the Canada Labor Code. Now, is that an okay way to wield the labor code? I mean, I'm not a lawyer in Canada, or in the US for that matter, but it definitely seems like pretty shaky ground to me. And a lot of labor unions and workers in Canada agree and have challenged it in the courts.
But the postal workers went back to work after their Section 107 order last year?
Yeah, and also interestingly enough, instead of sending them to arbitration, as would usually be the case with the Section 107 back to work order, and it's kind of funny to say usually would be the case because this is something the Canadian government's only been doing for like a year and a half, but usually when they've issued Section 107 back to work orders, they've sent the negotiations to binding arbitration. However, this time, the government ordered something called an Industrial Inquiry Commission to look into why the negotiations between Canada Post and the union stalled. So bargaining didn't really progress while the commission was underway, and then when it finally issued its report in May this year, you'll never guess whose side they took.
Please, I can't take the suspense.
Yeah, that's right. The commission recommended ending home delivery and letting rural postal offices close.
Why is Canada Post trying to basically end the postal service as people know it? And how have the public and workers been responding?
Well, Canada Post has said that it's losing money and that it's run billions in losses, especially since the demand for mail services have declined during the pandemic. But as Adam D.K. King also reported in Jacobin, there are other reasons for Canada Post's finances beyond pandemic-related changes in consumer behavior, including management's own investment choices. And that's a situation that will sound very similar to our postal workers here in the U.S. Not to mention, King also points out in his article the ways in which these types of delivery services and work is being more and more handed over to the gig economy, where workers are paid a lot less and don't have benefits. Also, it's always really worth challenging this idea that workers should just accept management's lines on finances, or that it's the workers who have nothing to do with the financial decisions made over their heads, who nevertheless should still have to pay the price when those decisions don't pan out. Also, as we touched on earlier, workers have tried to propose solutions to this revenue problem. CUPW has argued in favor of expanding postal services to include things like elder check-ins and high-speed internet. The union has also advocated for postal banking, which would help underserved communities and generate more revenue. And by the way, both the US and Canada used to have postal banking services before they were ended in the 1960s, thanks to lobbying from the banking industry. And I just can't imagine why the big banks wouldn't want people to have the option to use a service like postal banking.
That's so weird because I feel like big banks are known for working tirelessly to improve everyday people's lives. I'm just absolutely shocked. So, what has the union's response been like?
So, after the cooling off period that was part of the Section 107 order ended in May, the union called for a national ban on overtime work. Then in September, the union said that its members would stop delivering flyers in neighborhood mail. So, basically, think of those like uninterested advertisements you get in your mailbox. And this was a big deal because they're an important source of revenue for Canada Post. In fact, the flyer ban in particular seemed to be quite effective. After it launched, Canada Post finally said they were going to come back to the table and respond to the union's latest proposals, which they had had for like a month.
And then the government minded its own business and didn't intervene to tip the scales?
If only. The day before Canada Post was supposed to come back with their responses was actually the day that the government announced those major changes and cuts to the Postal Service. And of course, when Canada Post then later did come back with new offers, they reflected the government's announcement and were worse than the offers that postal workers had been forced to vote on during the summer and had overwhelmingly rejected. Wait, did I forget to mention that the government forced the postal workers to vote on best and final offers from Canada Post in the summer? Yeah, that happened. Anyway, that same day the government announced its plan to basically gut the Postal Service, postal workers in the Atlantic region of CUPW walked out, and the National Union called for a nationwide strike just hours later. And postal workers found themselves on strike for the second time in just a year. This second nationwide strike lasted for about 2 weeks, and then the union switched to rotating strikes, where just 1 or 2 locals were out at a time. So it's been a real uphill battle for the Canadian postal workers, and the government has really not had their back at every step of the way and has seemingly kind of specifically stepped in to stop their momentum and disrupt their leverage.
So, what's next?
Well, after my article published, CUPW announced that they reached an agreement in principle with Canada Post and suspended the rotating strike and flyer ban actions that they had been running. The union, noted that this isn't a tentative agreement, but it's rather just an agreement on kind of the big concepts and key issues for the contract. But they're still hashing out the actual contract language that will make up the tentative agreement that members vote on. So I haven't really had a chance to actually hear from posties about how they're receiving this news or what they think about this development. And I'm certainly really curious to see how the agreement will shake out, given that there's such sort of existential questions at place. But it's definitely a fight that the labor movement and the public, both in the US and Canada, should be keeping their eye on.
Thanks so much, Danielle. Well, that's our episode. Please rate us or leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. If you're listening to us on Podbean at labornotespodcast.podbean.com, download our episode. And don't forget to support our work this month at labornotes.org/donate.
We also have a couple of events coming up: an in-person troublemaker school in New Orleans tomorrow, Saturday, December 6th. I'm hearing many people calling this the Mardi Gras of the labor movement. And the online panel, Workers Organized to Resist ICE, on Wednesday, December 17th. You can sign up for both at labornotes.org/events.
The Labor Notes podcast is produced by Danielle Smith, Sindhu Sundar, and myself. Our title music was written and performed by our coworker, Keith Brower Brown. See you next week. Solidarity, y'all.